This is UFO researcher and paranormal investigator Bill Nell speaking. When a sci-fi fan thinks about UFOs or aliens, images and descriptions from their favorite fictional film, TV series, or book tends to pop into their thoughts. Sci-fi has been a powerful force in bringing the real and unreal about these subjects into our heads. Early stories found in picture books and dime novels from the turn of the century mirrored theories about canals on Mars. Images of Martians living by and traveling through those supposed waterways were trendy at that time. During the 1920s to 1940s, rockets became wildly popular, and there were amateur rocket clubs all over the world. News of Robert Goddard's successful experiments with rocketry near Roswell, New Mexico during that period added to the fever. In the world of science fiction, people were now traveling by rocket to our nearby planets to confront both friendly and horrifyingly unfriendly humanoids and space monsters. But all that soon changed. The 1950s brought us the golden age of modern science. We had begun to explore our environment more fully, started to reach out into space, and developed fantastic inventions like the supercomputer. Some say that the 1950s put the science in science fiction. Sci-fi stories became more believable because they were based on actual scientific theory or practical scientific fact. The same may be said of sci-fi stories about UFOs and aliens. The 1950s ushered in the golden age of the flying saucers. While sci-fi stories in previous decades ignored descriptions of creatures and crafts from actual sightings in favor of what science conjectured, things changed when alleged fact became more interesting than science fiction. Most sci-fi books, publications, television presentations, and films took notice of the fact that pilots, police officers, and other credible witnesses were coming forward with accounts of seeing unknown aerial phenomena and having encounters with odd beings that were too close for comfort. Although many were wildly exaggerated, the sci-fi genre picked up on the actual descriptions of crafts and creatures and incorporated these into their stories. This trend continued until the late 1960s, when sci-fi moved back in the direction of a mixture of what actual science says is possible and the author's imagination. It's largely remained there since that time. Although sticking to the theme of science mixed with pure fantasy, sci-fi still occasionally plays the reality card and cashes in on the popularity of non-fiction UFO stories and encounters. With the popularity of real UFO sightings, crop circles, and alien abduction stories at an all-time high in the 1970s to 1990s, films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Fire in the Sky, Independence Day, Men in Black, and Signs made it big at the box office. While the sci-fi genre tends to make real stories of UFOs and space creatures a bit easier to swallow, more fun, and sometimes a bit more frightening, the actual history of sightings and encounters is no less interesting. Strange objects have been seen in the sky for thousands of years. Many are explainable, some are not. It might surprise you to know that many ancient civilizations had a basic understanding of what they saw in the sky, using it for navigation and direction-finding purposes. Ancient people were as surprised and shocked as modern UFO witnesses when they saw discs, cigar-shaped objects, and strange balls of light and triangles that seemed under intelligent control. We know about their experiences because they took the time to chronicle sightings just as people do today. Landings, crop circles, and other physical phenomena associated with UFOs were often explained away or associated with some religious experience or devilish activity. UFO occupants have also been with us throughout history. Sightings of small, pale, or gray beings and other types of creatures have been reported in conjunction with sightings of UFOs. It's possible that worldwide stories of small beings like leprechauns, trolls, fairies, and others with great powers may have their origin in the UFO phenomenon. Some Native American groups, for example, trace their ancestry back to the skies and claim that they were brought here by small beings with great powers. As humans have acquired the technology to better study the world around them over the past 150 years, incidents of strange aerial phenomena have been better documented. From 1800 to 1900, for example, these objects became known as airships. Thousands of carefully documented sightings were printed in reputable newspapers throughout the world, along with drawings showing the typical discs, cigar shapes, and glowing balls of light. When photography became affordable and available to the masses, photographic evidence for UFOs rapidly grew. While there were and continue to be more than a few flakes, if you will, lunatics, and fake photos, we still have today many clear daytime photos, film, and video taken by honest and noteworthy UFO witnesses who are not just making it up or using something like Photoshop to create some sort of a bizarre fake photo. 1947 was the year of the UFO. Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, former military flyer, and respected businessman, was flying his aircraft near Mount Rainier in Washington State on June 24, 1947. He saw several strange objects traveling at a tremendous speed and reported this incident after landing. Arnold said the objects moved in a strange way like tossed rocks skipping across the water. He described them as looking like broken saucers in the cup inverted on top. The press picked up the description and the term flying saucer was born. 2 weeks later, the U.S. government released a press release saying that a flying disc had actually crashed and been retrieved by them near Roswell, New Mexico. They later changed their story to say it was merely a weather balloon, but stories of other crashes and witnesses from that crash and close encounters still persisted. By 1949, the U.S. military was faced with reports of strange things in the sky by thousands of people. Stories of crashed discs and flying saucers had caught the public's attention, and people wanted answers. Many witnesses were trained observers, and some were even pilots. During World War II, U.S. military pilots reported encounters with strange aerial phenomena and nicknamed them Foo Fighters. The military decided that the Air Force would investigate these type of incidents, and in 1949, Project Blue Book was born. Blue Book created the term UFO, or unidentified flying object, as an umbrella to fit all sightings under. After one former unnamed Air Force general said the Air Force is not going to investigate cups and saucers flying around the sky, they thought that term UFO was a better one. In 1969, a report based on Blue Book was issued to the public which stated that 95% of all sightings were explainable, 5% were not, and the objects seen posed no threat to national security. That was the end of Project Blue Book, end of the official government investigation into UFOs by the U.S. government. Revelations from thousands of Freedom of Information documents, military whistleblowers, and statements by foreign governments have shown us that Blue Book was merely a smokescreen designed to satisfy public curiosity, and that it was far more to this phenomenon than what the military had reported. In 1988, for example, the former Soviet Union issued a statement claiming that a UFO had landed in a park near Voronezh, Russia, that occupants had been seen, and that these objects were likely of extraterrestrial origin. One former Soviet document is a letter written by the head of NASA, sent to the Soviets, warning the Russians that American astronauts had seen and even encountered odd crafts while on the moon. The letter is dated 1969 and has a reference number on it, but NASA says they no longer have a copy, can't locate the reference number, and so cannot verify that document. One scientist that worked on the final Blue Book report was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professor from Northwestern University. After looking at reports and evidence that existed apart from Blue Book, he decided that the project had ignored the best evidence in favor of lesser cases that could easily be explained away. He created the Dr. J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, known as CUFOS today, with the hope that a scientific study of the phenomenon would yield more than what the government found. It was Hynek that created a simple way to describe contact with UFOs in scientific terms. A close encounter of the first kind was a sighting. A close encounter of the second kind involved physical evidence, like a crop circle. A close encounter of the third kind was with a UFO occupant. Although Hynek didn't think much of abduction stories, a close encounter of the fourth kind is a term generally used to describe UFO abduction cases. Hynek passed away in the 1980s. Since Dr. Hynek's death in the 1980s, some have added a close encounters of the fifth kind, which they consider to be a somewhat psychic encounter. Some common explanations for UFOs are ball lightning, misidentified private, commercial, and military aircraft, and natural phenomenon. There are problems with these explanations. Ball lightning appears so briefly that it's rarely photographed. Many pilots themselves see UFOs and would know the difference between planes and something else. Besides that, people that live near airports, who often report UFO sightings, are used to seeing airplanes, helicopters, and other types of flying craft in the sky and would know the difference between them and something unusual. Most people that do report UFO sightings no longer bother to report far-off objects in the sky that might be natural phenomenon, but they tend to report close encounters that defy explanation. Within the field of what some call ufology, there are two groups that have come to define the investigation of unknown aerial phenomena. These are the true believers and the skeptics. The true believers are certain that UFOs defy explanation, while the skeptics believe that all or most sightings can eventually be explained in a conventional way. Ironically, it's these two groups that do most of the harm to the serious study of UFOs. Both are certain about their beliefs, with little or no room for science, hypotheses, or debate. For my part, it seems more desirable to be somewhere in the middle of the two, with room for movement in either direction on a case-by-case basis. Stories of objects and creatures from space remain with us and are likely to stay that way for a very long time. It's unlikely that they'll vanish as long as sci-fi writers write and people continue to report what they feel are actual encounters with strange aerial phenomenon and beings that travel in them. I began reading about UFOs when I was 9 years old. By the time I was 12, I guess you could say I was investigating them. And there have been a lot of strange things that I've read about, heard about, and talked about. But probably none is stranger than the Flushing Meadows Park Zoo animal mutilations and UFO mystery. Flushing Meadows Park has a long and unusual history. It's located 10 miles east of Manhattan, on Long Island in the borough of Queens, New York City, in the state of New York, between the towns of Flushing and Corona. The park started out as a swampy land situated along Flushing Creek. The area skirted ancient Native American trails that were later developed into Rodman Street, today that's called College Point Boulevard, Roosevelt Avenue, and other paved roadways. The place had a bad reputation among the original inhabitants. Some of the Native American tribes that existed in that area avoided fishing and hunting in that particular space. Most animals stayed away from the mosquito-ridden grounds with its stale water and often foul odor. Pretty much it was just a swamp. When Dutch and English settlers arrived in that region during the early to mid-1600s and began to establish farms, homes, and businesses, they found the swampy land equally repulsive. The settlers called the area rotten land and avoided it for health and superstitious reasons. Odd lights were often seen high over the swamp, and some of these sightings were noted in early church logbooks. These sightings should not be confused with swamp gas, a natural phenomenon that requires certain environmental elements to be present when it occurs and never appears very far off the ground. Because of its location and inability to be used for much else, the swampy land became a dumping area for ashes. By the 1920s, it was known as the Corona Ash Dumps. F. Scott Fitzgerald called the place a Valley of Ashes in his novel, The Great Gatsby, which he published in 1925, and it was about Long Island society. However, the once worthless area was about to be transformed into a marvelous showplace thanks to a grand event known as the World's Fair. Because it was one of the few large blocks of land still available for development in the New York City area, Parks Commissioner Robert Moses and city planners devised a plan to clear and fill the land for use as the site of the 1939 to 1940 New York World's Fair. Most of the ashes and refuse were incorporated into the bases of new highways that were being built around and through that area. These later became the Grand Central Parkway, Van Wyck Expressway, Interborough Parkway, and Long Island Expressway. After the 1939 to 1940 World's Fair ended in 1940, most of the structures from the fair were leveled, and the area became known as Flushing Meadows Corona Park. A few of the buildings that remained included the New York State Pavilion that was used as the first home to the United Nations from 1946 until 1951, when that organization moved into their permanent location in Manhattan. That building still exists today and has become the Queens Museum of Art at Flushing Meadows Park. Flushing Meadows again became the home to an international exposition after it was chosen as the location for the 1964 to 1965 New York World's Fair. After the fair closed, the area again was left with a few prominent buildings from the event, including the Unisphere, the Heliport, which became a catering establishment, and the observation towers, which were featured in the movie Men in Black with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, in which they were supposed to be parked flying saucers. The area also became home to Shea Stadium, which is used by the New York Mets Major League Baseball team, and the USTA Billie Jean King National Tennis Center, where the U.S. Open is held. There's also a zoo and other facilities used for swimming, aquatic, and boating events. During the 1964 to 1965 World's Fair, there were several UFO sightings that made the news. Most were described as lights in the sky and were explained away as aircraft taking off or landing at nearby LaGuardia Airport. However, it should be noted that people in that area are used to seeing all kinds of aircraft and aircraft lights associated with landings and takeoffs from LaGuardia and JFK airports. They know when they see something different in the day or night sky. The sightings of strange lights above the old fairgrounds continued after the World's Fair ended, and in 1966, one of the most startling occurred. Hundreds of motorists driving on the Grand Central Parkway side of Flushing Meadows Park reported seeing a large, luminous, blue-green object, which looked like, quote, like a glowing dirigible that came into view and then descended into the lake, unquote, at about 7:40 in the evening. A press report from those days stated, quote, a number of observers said that the object appeared to correspond to the descriptions of UFOs reported in Michigan the previous week, which Air Force experts had attributed to swamp gas discharged from lake bottoms in springtime. This explanation did not satisfy everyone in Queens. Some thought that maybe the Martians wanted to visit the World's Fair and didn't know it was over, unquote. More recently, a number of reports came in about white and green lights in a triangular formation seen moving back and forth over Flushing Meadows Park during July 2nd to 5, 2008. Some of the witnesses said that the lights suddenly appeared, disappeared, and reappeared again between about 10 o'clock at night and 3 in the morning. again on July 2nd to 5th, 2008. However, strange lights are not the only bizarre phenomenon associated with UFOs that's occurred in the park. In 1968, the Flushing Meadows Zoo opened up in Flushing Meadows Park on the grounds of the old 1964 to 65 World's Fair. Although small in scale, the zoo had a number of exhibits and plenty of animals, including sea lions, black bears, sheep, bison, mountain lions, coyotes, bald eagles, birds, and wolves. Since its opening, the zoo has been associated with several disturbing UFO events. The first may have occurred in 1977. After several nights of UFO sightings above the park, wolves managed to escape from the zoo on November 30th, 1977. Official reports said that 12 wolves managed to claw their way through a chain-link fence surrounding their pen and killed several of the other animals until they were recaptured by Parks Department personnel and New York City police. However, a caretaker working there at the time said that while making his rounds he found several animals missing, not just the wolves, and others dead. The dead animals did not look like they had been killed by predators. He said that none of the animal pens or enclosures had been unlocked, damaged, tampered with, or broken into. There were a number of odd instances where UFO sightings are associated with the sudden appearance or disappearance of animals. Animals found to be missing from zoos turn up elsewhere without explanation. Wild animals not native to an area suddenly appear in that area, also without explanation. All this tends to occur during times when UFOs are observed nearby. The caretaker present during the 1977 event first contacted me in 1989 about another and far more disturbing occurrence at the zoo. He and several others that worked there met me near the area of the zoo to talk about this. It was being rebuilt at that time, and they claimed that the reason for that was something so disturbing that I still have trouble grasping the enormity of what actually happened. After seeing me on a local television news broadcast talking about a major UFO sighting and landing in nearby Casino Park, several employees of the zoo called my UFO hotline and asked to meet with me. After a phone conversation with one of them, I met them at Flushing Meadows Park, and we talked about what happened at the zoo. It began with 2 nights of UFO sightings in 1987. Green and white balls of light that formed into all sorts of shapes hovered directly above the zoo and caused the animals to become greatly disturbed. Due to budget cuts and because there were police in the park all night long, caretakers and other zoo employees were no longer present at the zoo all night long. The last one would leave around 11 o'clock at night and show up again around 7:30 in the morning to open up the zoo for the other employees. On the morning after the 2 nights of UFO sightings in 1987, the caretaker and several other employees opened the zoo and were horrified to find every animal in the zoo dead. Not just dead, but strangely mutilated. The caretaker and other employees told me that all of the animals were still locked or secured in their pens, and exhibits with no sign of forced or keyed entry, so it was not like someone went and just broke in there. Although they were unable to photograph any of the animals, they said all of them looked as though they had been surgically autopsied or examined. Despite the deaths and apparent mutilation, little or no blood was present. Needless to say, the zoo was closed without explanation, and no trespassing signs were placed near the entrance and on fences surrounding it. Parks Department personnel and police were summoned. The zoo was closed, and within hours, all of the dead animal carcasses were removed. At that point, plans were made for the zoo to be leveled. Officially, the deaths never happened, and the press showed no interest in the matter, even if it was reported to them at all. With plans already in the works to refurbish the zoo buildings, it wasn't hard to arrange for the entire zoo property to be rebuilt and raised from the ground up. All of the old buildings and enclosures were destroyed, and several inches of dirt were actually removed from the area of the zoo. During that time, none of the employees that spoke to me were allowed near the place. Most were assigned to other temporary duties in the park. When it officially reopened in 1988, The zoo had already undergone a $16 million rebuilding. All new buildings, exhibits, and animals were now available to the public. The zoo employees that spoke to me said that the animal deaths and mutilations were eventually explained away as the work of vandals or ritualistic killers in an internal report. However, they point out that the vandals would have made all kinds of noise trying to kill the animals, had to break into most of the pens and exhibits, and would have left a significant amount of blood and other evidence behind. None of these things were present. No alarms went off, and the park police and other employees working in nearby areas on the night in question heard nothing. The only reason that the caretaker and employees contacted me with their stories was because they felt that the possibility existed that the same thing could happen again, and they found the previous explanation for the deaths and mutilations to be absolutely ridiculous. It's important to understand that a number of animal disappearances and mutilations associated with UFO sightings have occurred for many years throughout the world. Cows, horses, and other farm animals have especially been targets for this type of activity. As with the zoo animals, little blood is found nearby when mutilations occur. Animals are found missing from locked barns and secured pens. Farmers and ranchers have reported these kinds of incidents, while law enforcement officers and veterinary practitioners have been at a loss to adequately explain them. A few human mutilations associated with UFO events have also been reported. Fortunately, these incidents are rare. After a B-52 crash in Laos during the Vietnam War, a special forces team sent in to retrieve the crew found them all dead and still strapped in their seats and strangely mutilated. No blood was present, and the photos and information collected at the site were later placed in a secret report known as Blue Book Report Number 13. That indicates that the U.S. government somehow associated that incident with UFOs. There have been a number of unreported animal deaths, disappearances, and mutilations throughout Long Island over the years. These include the amazing discovery of a St. Bernard dog that was found at another Queens Park turned inside out in the 1980s, a number of missing dogs and cats that mysteriously vanished from Suffolk County neighborhoods in the 1990s, wild game missing from a hunting lodge in the Montauk area during the 1970s and 80s, and a few cattle mutilations which occurred in Nassau and Suffolk counties from the 1980s to the present. When former astronaut Edgar Mitchell recently told the world that he had been briefed on aliens and UFOs by the U.S. government, the media reacted by treating his comments with disdain. Mitchell, a former Navy officer and astronaut that walked on the moon, grew up in Roswell, New Mexico. Over the past several years, he's indicated that he was living in the town when the 1947 UFO crash occurred and knew what happened based on conversations with first and second-hand witnesses. He has also said that several other people with intimate knowledge about the UFO crash have taken him into their confidence. Mitchell gave this statement to Robert Collins, quote, "I grew up in the Roswell area. I was almost 17, a senior in high school when it happened. Family members were ranchers and cattle people. We all knew the ranchers and townspeople in that area, including where the UFO impacted. In spite of official denials and threats about talking, the local law told the story. After my space flight, and being a local boy involved, not only the locals trusted me with their stories because they were getting older and wanted the truth out, but were afraid to say it publicly. So they considered me a trustworthy source to carry their story onward. Been telling it that way ever since. If anyone bothered to ask my opinion, since the Pentagon incident 11 years ago, only now, suddenly, it got international media attention. The Pentagon incident that Edgar Mitchell is talking about occurred after he requested and received permission to meet with the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during April of 1997. Mitchell wanted to brief them on what he knew or heard about the Roswell UFO crash. After the briefing, Mitchell says he was told by a Navy admiral that what he knew about the crash was correct. He recently commented on that meeting, quote, "I did take my story to the Pentagon, not NASA, but the Pentagon, and asked for a meeting with the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and got it. And I told my story and what I know, and eventually had that confirmed by the admiral that I spoke with, that indeed what I was saying was true. When a vice admiral found out about the Mitchell meeting at the Pentagon, he wanted to attend. The vice admiral was refused access and told that he didn't have a need to know. This interesting side story provides proof that the U.S. UFO secret is one available only to an elite group of military leaders within the U.S. government. It also lends credence to the idea that the President and most elected officials probably do not have access to one of our nation's biggest secrets. When Harry Truman signed the National Security Act in 1947, it allowed for the restriction of certain information from the President and other members of the U.S. government. The idea was to safeguard national secrets and provide sitting presidents and other elected officials with plausible deniability. I doubt that Truman envisioned a time when members of the government would routinely lie to and deceive those they were constitutionally obligated to serve. It's easy for mainstream news company reporters to label Edgar Mitchell as a New Age Kool-Aid drinker because of his interest in exploring the mind sciences from a more eclectic point of view. However, I don't see them attacking other astronauts for their beliefs or actions. Many of the original Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo crew members were notorious drinkers and philanderers. Some space shuttle astronauts flew training missions while drunk. Others have publicly exposed themselves or even lobbied for the rights of earthworms. Despite behavior that ranges from criminal to comical, these astronauts continue to represent NASA on TV and print interviews. It's easy for members of the press to set themselves up as societal filters set in place to decide what people should be told. It's harder to accept and report on the kind of truths that are not easily covered in 30-second television news reports or short paragraphs and increasingly abbreviated versions of news publications. As a line from the film City of Angels proclaims, some things are true whether you believe them or not.